it about 10 seconds and then you can kick it off.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us today. From the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, it's been clear that our neighborhood bars and restaurants have been hit the hardest of any businesses. They were the first to shut down in March, and they've been slowest to reopen 2 years later. Unemployment in the restaurant industry remains stubbornly slow to recover, and approximately 90,000 independent restaurants have closed permanently since the start of the pandemic. We all know that restaurants are the cornerstone of a livable community. They have employed nearly 60% of Americans at some point in their lives, me included. They are a major source of employment for people of color, and they support a $1 trillion supply chain that stretches all the way around the world. The federal government has provided some help to these institutions through the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, a program based on the Restaurants Act that I first introduced in June of 2020. But the program fell short. People rushed to enroll, and the money was exhausted in a matter of days. Only $28.6 billion was provided, about to cover 1/3 of the applicants. Now, more than 100,000 restaurants were saved, but the fate of nearly 177,000 are hanging in the balance. I've introduced legislation to replenish the Restaurant Revitalization Fund with the number that would cover all outstanding applicants. We knew at the time that there would be a need for more money. Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, when we had a ceremony celebrating the passage of the bill originally, acknowledged that. And Leader Schumer, Speaker Pelosi have been supportive of efforts to try and get more money into the program. Recently, we've introduced legislation. We had, in fact, in about 2 days, we had a letter with more than 150 members of Congress who've signed on. We have 234 who have co-sponsored my legislation that would replenish the fund. And we're here today to continue the drumbeat of the need for replenishment, what difference it makes, how it is affecting these vital businesses. We're going to listen to a few independent restaurants who've been in the middle of this and who have not yet received replenishment fund. We'll hear from each of them. Then we have some of my colleagues, notably Rosa DeLauro, who's chair of the influential Appropriations Committee, who's been extraordinarily supportive of our efforts. And then we'll hear from some of my other colleagues. And at the end, we'll see if there are members of the media who would like to pose questions. So let's start with somebody from my hometown, Alex Briggs, a constituent in Portland, Oregon, from Real MN on Southeast Division Street. Alex, you want to share your story with us?
Yes. Congressman Blumenauer and distinguished members of the panel, thank you so much for inviting me to speak today about my experience with the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. Time is running out for restaurants and bars like mine. We appreciate your attention today. My name is Alex Briggs. My wife, Carrie, and I own the Real and Tavern in Southeast Portland. We have owned and operated the Real since 2017, but this iconic tavern has been serving Portland since the 1940s. When the previous owners retired, we poured our life savings into purchasing it. We considered ourselves blessed to carry on its legacy. Real Inn is a small neighborhood tavern, beloved across Portland for our fried chicken, welcoming staff, and eclectic decor that can only be cultivated over decades of operation. In 2019, we were running a thriving business. We were open 365 days a year, working tirelessly, but making an honest living. We employed 10 incredible staff members, mostly women, who were making upwards of $50 an hour. In the 2 years of ownership, we had almost doubled our sales. We were debt-free. Our hard work was paying off, and we were living the American dream. As 2020 began, we were finalizing paperwork to purchase our building, expand our business, and add a second location. On March 16th, 2020, the nightmare began. We closed our doors. Within 2 weeks, we were laying off our entire staff. Uncertainty and fear took over America. Mandates were firmly put in place, and we stayed closed. Over 100 days in 2020. In 2019, we were open every single day. When we could finally open, it was limited hours and takeaway only. It was more expensive to be open than closed. We tried every pivot possible. We needed to do whatever possible to support our staff, community, and our family. With the small amount of PPP we qualified for, we were able to pay staff and keep our lights on for about a month. In 2019, our sales were $1.6 million. In 2020, our sales were $300,000, mostly from quarter one. Through no fault of our own, our beloved business was being destroyed. The pandemic didn't end in 2020. In 2021, it got worse. Awash in new crushing debt, we pushed forward. We dealt with skyrocketing supply prices when we could even get what we needed. We tried to navigate keeping our cherished clientele and what staff we could rehire safe. With no support, we worked 7 days a week with extremely limited childcare, making every sacrifice possible to keep our business afloat. We were forced to make the impossible choice of risking our health and safety or economic ruin. In May of 2021, we were awarded an RF grant of $1.2 million. In 3 to 5 days, we would have our money. We would be able to pay our suppliers, our back rent, our staff, fix equipment, erase debt incurred over the past year. We would survive. But that money never came. We called the SBA every day for weeks, looking for answers. After a month, we were notified that due to lawsuits, we would not receive our grant. That's the moment my family spirit was officially crushed. Our hopes of expansion became a distant memory. We are one equipment failure away from disaster. We cannot lose our business. The pandemic is far from over for us. We are great business owners, responsible, practical, and law-abiding. And like the 177,000 other businesses across this nation who have been left out of the RF grant program, we are on the brink of ruin through no fault of our own. If we are not funded, this will be a generational catastrophe whose ripple effects will be felt on every main street in America. Replenishing the fund will prevent this disaster. It will stabilize payrolls, supply chains, farms, supply houses, equipment manufacturers, landlords, banks, and most importantly, American families like mine. The pandemic is not over. If we are not refunded, the effects of the pandemic will last for decades. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Alex. Very poignant story. And next, we have Amanda Cohen, an active member of the Independent Restaurant Coalition from Dirt Candy in New York, New York. Amanda,
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Congressman Blumenauer, for having me. And thank you so much to the distinguished guests of this panel for also joining us. My name is Amanda Cohen, and I am the chef and owner of Dirt Candy, which is an all-vegetable restaurant in the Lower East Side of New York City. Before anybody asks, Dirt Candy means vegetables from the earth, candies from the earth. It's the number one question I get. We've been open for 14 years. We managed to grow from an 18-seat restaurant to, in New York, what seems to us like a big restaurant, 40 seats. I know it's not that way in the rest of the country, but we were able to grow. And we were also one of the first restaurants to eliminate tipping and to guarantee each and every one of our employees a fair living wage. A little over 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, I closed the doors to the restaurant and I had to lay off 35 employees. It was the most devastating day that I'd had in the past 14 years with the restaurant. All of a sudden, I couldn't take care of my employees, people who I'd been taking care of, who had worked for me for 5, 10, 14 years. About 3 months later, I was able to reopen when New York started to reopen. And like most restaurants, I pivoted. I used to be sort of a fancy, fussy restaurant, lots of tweezer food. That really wasn't working through the pandemic. We pivoted to sandwiches and salads. We stopped serving inside. We built our outdoor structure. Actually, we built it many times as the rules kept changing. And we tried to survive, but to be honest, it was almost impossible. The restaurant is not on a very lovely street. It's sort of in between two highways almost. We got hit a number of times by buses and cars and bikes and had to build it over and over again. And honestly, the bulk of our business is tourism. We are a destination restaurant. We are unfortunately not a local neighborhood hangout, and there were no tourists left in the city. And we went from doing on average around $11,000 a night in sales to somewhere between $600 and $800. And those were the good nights. We had nights where we did $100 or $0. We also had unexpected costs. Building that structure cost us over $25,000, but worse than that, heating that structure. My electricity bills went from on average $2,000 in the winter to over $5,000 month after month after month. And that doesn't even include putting the electricity in that structure. Our bills kept piling up. And the one source of light was the RRF. When it got funded, I had my first good night's sleep in over a year. It made serving outside in the winter in a snowsuit totally worth it. We were able to survive. At just around that time, we had reopened and I had started hiring back employees. I think at the time I had about 20 new employees. I rehired them with a higher pay and more benefits that we had been offering beforehand, because after the year we had all had, it felt a little unethical not to treat my employees even better, and to feel very grateful that they came back to work. But unfortunately, I did not receive the RRF. I did not receive the grant, and it was devastating. It was another disappointment in a long, hard year. And then we had Delta. And then we had Omicron, and that devastated my business even more. January in a vegetarian restaurant tends to be one of the busiest months because everybody goes vegan to be healthy. That's their resolution for the month. It's always our best month, and we saw almost no customers. We are barely surviving, and I am not alone. There are tens of thousands of restaurant owners who are as exhausted as I am, who are wondering if continuing to own a restaurant is even worth it. We are all tired and frustrated, and many of us are on the cusp of closing. I don't want to be a statistic. We know that 90,000 restaurants have closed. I don't want to be the 90,001 restaurant to close. But I can't do this without more help. I want to be a part of my community. And I want to ask of all of you to please support my business and all the small businesses. Please replenish the fund and save our restaurants.
Oh, thank you, Amanda. Very moving. One can only imagine what you all have been going through, and we appreciate your sharing your story with us this afternoon. Next, we have Pete Cortez from the National Restaurant Association from La Familia Cortez in San Antonio. Pete, you're on.
Well, buenas tardes y muchas gracias to you, Representative Blumenauer, Representative Doggett, who has been a friend to our restaurant for many years, and all the lawmakers who are fighting to replenish the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. In 1941, at the age of 23 and 21, and with a limited education, my grandparents began their pursuit of the American dream when they opened a three-table cafe for farmers who worked and workers who ate before sunrise in San Antonio's produce terminal known as El Mercado. Through a lot of hard work and the blessings of God, Mi Tierra became a world-famous landmark, the place where hometown regulars and hungry tourists go for authentic Mexican food and a warm Texas welcome. Now into our fourth generation, my family and I continue that hard work and tradition across 4 restaurants in San Antonio while losing one during the pandemic and having just opened a new one 3 months before the pandemic that cost us millions of dollars of an investment. But what can one restaurant do? As an immigrant from Mexico, my grandfather's tombstone proudly states that he's an American by choice and not by chance. Pedro Cortés, my grandfather, believed in preserving San Antonio's Mexican culture through our passion for hospitality and cuisine. His vision played a huge role in the revitalization of the restaurant's home, El Mercado, and the surrounding neighborhood known as Zona Cultural. Once considered a blighted area of San Antonio, our family worked to help revitalize the neighborhood, and now it is one of the most popular destinations in San Antonio. To this day, our family works with the city and community to revitalize our downtown and to preserve and promote our culture. Mi Tierra was famously open 24/7, 365, but when the world changed in March of 2020, we reluctantly had to close our doors for the first time in almost 80 years. As we have always done, we did our best to take care of our work family, many of whom have been with us for over 25, 30, 40, and in the case of our chef, 52 years. We are also committed to our community by giving of our time and treasure to support the food bank, Haven for Hope, Catholic Charities, and even temporarily converted our dining rooms into a grocery store to provide necessities to our local community when shelves were sparse. When we finally welcomed guests back into our dining rooms, we, along with almost all restaurants nationwide, were met with a new set of challenges: 25 to 50% seating capacity, rising food and labor costs, supply chain issues, and a diminished workforce that has plagued an industry that already operates off of razor-thin margins. Our team is truly part of La Familia, and our guests are considered part of the family as well. Although we have thankfully reopened our doors, the past 2 years have changed the way we interact with our customers. Less dining in, more takeout, reduced tourism, and significantly less business travelers. Restaurants like ours are fighting every day just to stay open, and we need your help. We are grateful for all that Congress has already done, but the pandemic has caused a severe financial struggle that hangs over our family's business, along with 177,000 others struggling to stay open every day. Replenishing RRF will not only provide my family's restaurants with badly needed security, but will protect and preserve cultural destinations that sustain communities for future generations. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pete. Next, we have Jim Woods, a member of the Brewers Association from Woods Beer and Wine in the Bay Area. Jim, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Representative Blumenauer and other members of Congress. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today about the replenishment of the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. My name is Jim Woods. I'm the founder and CEO of Woods Beer and Wine Company, a family of 5 brew pubs in San Francisco. We brew creative small batch beers inspired by nature, place, and tradition. We sell the vast majority of the beer that we brew in our brew pub restaurants to our loyal customers. Face-to-face interaction over a pint of beer is the lifeblood of our business. Through hard work and our passion for what we do, our team and our spaces have become integral parts of their communities in San Francisco. Our first location celebrates its 10-year anniversary next month. The coronavirus pandemic was devastating to our business, both from a financial perspective and a spiritual perspective. We lost the human interaction that nurtures our brand, and we had to say goodbye to 2/3 of our team members. We experienced a 40% drop of sales in 2020, and we were still 16% below pre-pandemic levels for 2021. What these numbers don't reflect is how much the pandemic impacted profits, however. Like many other breweries, we pivoted to packaging our beer in cans for purchase to go. Canned beer has a much smaller margin than draft beer. We only make a quarter of the profit that we make on a pint when we sell a can of beer. While we managed to claw back some of the revenue we lost through canning, we did so at great cost to our profitability. At the end of 2020, we made the difficult decision to close our highest grossing location in Oakland when our landlord chose to raise our rent in the middle of the pandemic. Our former space still sits vacant, depriving us of critical cash flow and the community of a beloved institution. It was a brutal experience to dismantle something I had painstakingly built with my own hands and say goodbye to our team members and loyal customers. The brewery is in the background here of my Zoom display. We were ready to apply for the RRF the day it launched. In fact, I even noticed that the portal was open early and was able to submit my application before the official launch time. Despite submitting one of the very first applications, we did not receive funding. Some of our neighboring breweries and restaurants did receive funding, however. Not only do we miss out on these funds, but we were now expected to compete with these businesses on pricing, purchasing raw materials, and hiring employees. The partial funding of the RRF program caused a massive distortion in the marketplace, creating a class of haves and have-nots. I know the legislature never intended to pick winners and losers, but your failure to fully fund the program has done just that. But the pandemic is over, right? You might get that impression as you wait for a table at our newest location in the Lower Haight on a Friday night with no masks in sight. But what you don't see is the dark cloud of debt that hangs over our business. It hangs over the entire service industry. I worked harder in the past 2 years than I've ever worked in my life, and yet I've lost so much: sleep, team members, our flagship location, financial stability. During the pandemic, I was blessed with the births of my 2 sons. My 2-year-old James loves visiting the brewery and running to hide behind pallets of cans and fermentation tanks. His pure joy reminds me of the way that I saw my business before the pandemic. Your support to replenish the Restaurant Revitalization Fund would help restore the health of our business to its pre-pandemic state and allow me to continue doing what I love, making beer and sharing it with my neighbors, friends, and family. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. I know it's painful for you, all of you, to have to share that. I would like to just, before turning to my colleagues, I would just like to ask one question. Amanda, I think you said that it was more expensive to stay open than to close. Do you want to?
I think that actually, I mean, it's true.
Yeah.
But I think that was either Alex or Pete,
No.
but I agree with it totally. It would have been easier to be closed than open.
Could any of you elaborate on that in terms of the consequence of closing versus being open in terms of your cost structure and the risk that you're bearing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was me, but I'm sure that's something that's an experience that can be shared by everyone here. And what we saw in that time with the various mandates and accessibility to supplies and the cost of supplies, we were only able to be open limited hours a day, but we still had the same overhead. We still had the same rent. We still had the same insurance, an insurance that never gave us anything over that pandemic after we were closed. This is a whole separate issue. So we were basically asked to operate with 2 hands behind our back, pay all the same costs, but receive not anywhere close to what we had before.
And I'm assuming in some cases the costs are increased in terms of the protocols that you had to follow.
Yeah, and I think for sure, providing anything from any of the health related supplies of sanitizers and gloves and masks and then tests and anything like that. But on a basic level of like when mayonnaise at one point cost $4 and then at another point a year later it costs $18, how are you supposed to pass those costs on to your clientele? I mean, as an establishment, we prided ourselves on making an amazing product at a price that every single person could afford. And now we couldn't do that.
Thank you. We've been joined by some of my amazing colleagues who have been champions of this program. I'll turn first to Rosa DeLauro from Connecticut, the chair of the Appropriations Committee.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Earl. I want to thank everyone. And I just want to repeat to all of you, Earl's leadership in this fight has been crucial to restaurant owners across the country and in my community in the 3rd District of Connecticut. He was the lead on the 28.6, but he took charge and day in and day out, made the fight. I'm just struck with you, with Alex and Amanda and Pete and Jim, and just a couple of things. I mean, I think Alex, you said you only want to make an honest living, and that's a theme throughout everybody's testimony, an honest living. You're willing to work hard, to kill yourselves and your families, etc., to do the job and to make a go of it, and to be successful. And Amanda, when you said you don't want to be a statistic, you don't want to close. None of you want to close. And Pete, your plea for we need your help. And Jim, when you talk about the dark cloud of death, that hangs over, really hangs over all of you, which is really, really, poignant. But it's not our sympathy that you need our action, and you need the funds, to be able to help you. And I see my congressional colleagues, Lloyd Doggett and Susie Lee, and, so glad to join with them. We all know that this pandemic was the greatest public health and economic crisis in a generation. And our local businesses, like all of you, are not spared. Restaurants, small businesses are the heart and soul of our communities. They are a lifeline, for people. They're people come and go, and they're tourism destinations as well. Nationwide, the pandemic cost restaurants and bars over $280 billion in sales. A National Restaurant Association, as has been pointed out already, 90,000 restaurants and bars have closed. In the state of Connecticut, the restaurant industry is one of the hardest hit sectors, with many permanently closed. They've scaled down operations and are struggling to reopen. The leisure and hospitality industry accounted for 31.5% of all jobs lost in Connecticut. About 3,300, almost 3,400 restaurants in Connecticut applied for over $790 million in relief. Only 2,000, a little over 2,000 small businesses received the funding, and 816 Connecticut restaurants and bars did not receive the funding that they applied for. We cannot, and you can please understand from all of us, we cannot afford, and we understand that, to leave you all behind. We can't do that. If an industry is failing, like an automobile industry, an airline industry, a childcare industry, it is our responsibility to really be a part of what the solution is. The future of our restaurants in Connecticut depends, 8,300 restaurants, depends on refilling the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. I've heard from my constituents, over and over again, hardworking women, men. They applied on the first day, as you did, or even before the launch, and were unable to receive the funds. So while the recovery has provided a lifeline to many businesses and some restaurants across my state, but they're struggling. They've been turned away. We know what's at stake. When small businesses are closed, profits decrease, employers are forced to lay off employees, close their doors, and hardworking families struggle to pay the bills, to feed themselves or to feed their kids. And they worry, you lose your home. You're just trying to make ends meet. And time is of the essence. Every day that you go without support means that you will be forced to close. We were all proud that, with the American Rescue Plan, we were all proud of the 28.6, but it was nowhere near what was needed. Funding ran out. SBA received 362,000 applications requesting $75 billion, which was triple the available funding and $50 million in outstanding needs. So what we need to do is to the Restaurant Revitalization Fund needs to be at the center of where we go for the future. And I'm a co-sponsor, as others are here, of Congressman Blumenauer's bill, $60 billion. That means that everyone gets a leg up. Again, that my constituents and my colleagues have written to me, as they have to the speaker, about replenishing this fund in any supplemental legislation that may come along. And I want to be upfront and honest with you and tell you what I think in terms of direction where we need to try to go, and give and some advice. I can't make any commitments. We can't even get past the COVID supplemental bill that was introduced. We can't get there from here. We didn't take it up the week before this restaurant recess. I talk every day to the appropriations staff, including this afternoon. No, it's not coming up this week. We don't know what would happen, next week. But as I said, well, I can't make any commitments. A key to any item being included in whatever the future legislation is, you have to pass both the House and the Senate. And I'm going to go right to the Senate. We need 10 Republican senators to support the passage of legislation in the Senate. To date, we do not have 10 Republican senators, and that was for health issues, about tests, about therapeutics, about vaccinations, etc. They're not there. They have refused to pass a piece of legislation, and this is not political. I'm being honest with you. They say that whatever we do needs to be offset, and that means instead of viewing this as an emergency, where you can pass a supplemental bill in an emergency way and it does not have to be offset, they are refusing to pass a piece of legislation that is not totally offset. The other group you need to talk to, and we can be helpful in this regard. I'd be happy to provide you with the people who voted for the omnibus appropriations bill in the Senate. And there are people that you may be able to get to see if we have an opportunity there to get them to support this effort and to support a supplemental bill. You also need the authorizers of the Small Business Committee. In the House, that is, and we can get you this information, it is Congresswoman Nydia Velasquez of New York and Congressman Blaine Lukemeyer. In the Senate, you have Senator Cardin of Maryland, and you have Ranking Member Rand Paul. These are people that you need to be in touch with, and obviously we'll work with you to provide names and how you can reach these people. I just want to say to you that I will keep fighting. We will keep fighting to keep our restaurants and our small businesses open and help you meet these challenges. We are passionate about this issue. And you passed on the heartrending stories of what is going on in your lives. This is not just about your business, it's about your life's work, it's the lives of your families. And I can only just say to you, you have to be committed, and I know you are, to continue to make your voices heard over and over and over again. The Congress is an institution that responds to external pressure. And you've got a lot of well-meaning people internally, but you are the external pressure to put on this institution to make it move and make it move in the direction that makes a difference to you and to your families and to your livelihoods. And Earl, I can only just say thank you for letting me be a part of this effort.
Thank you. Today. Thank you for your passion, Rosa. And
I don't know how you want to deal with questions, Earl. I'll wait till my colleagues are finished and then we can ask questions.
We'll see
that's fine.
Yes,
that's great.
That great. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you.
We do have Senator Cardin and about half a dozen Republicans in the Senate. So there's movement, and in the House we have 234.
Yes.
So there's some bright spots.
Right.
Next we have Lloyd Doggett. We've heard from one of your constituents. Lloyd is my partner in crime on the Ways and Means Committee. He's a senior member there, very effective, very outspoken, very passionate. Lloyd, thanks for joining us here.
Well, Earl, thanks. And I was a little late joining because of another Zoom meeting on some of our foreign affairs problems that are going on in the world today. But this is important, and you have been incredibly tenacious on this. I can attest personally from early last year in not giving up or giving in on getting some relief for our restaurants. Just as a practical matter, being back with some of the time I've had here this year, I'm finding one place after another where I used to take constituents to lunch is not offering lunch anymore, and many of them are closed entirely. Some of the most iconic restaurants in Austin are shut down. And I've found that to be true in San Antonio too. Pete, it's good to see you. If you're going to San Antonio and you want a feel of the local culture, the one place to go other than the Alamo is Mi Tierra. It's where everybody kind of gathers from San Antonio and enjoys the essence of a really unique culture. But I know it's challenged, as Pete has said, and so are so many of our other restaurants. I guess two thoughts. One is I serve on the budget committee. Last week, we had a hearing that was really about women in the workforce, but talking a lot about childcare. Our Republican colleagues made it clear they were not interested in any relief for anybody. I know some of them are on our bill and they make an exception for the revitalization fund. Amplifying what Rosa said, the measure we could not get support on is about assuring that there are monies in the fall for another booster if that's necessary for therapeutics, and we're having trouble getting support for that. We will not have a freestanding revitalization fund vote. There are many other needs out there. It's going to be combined with something else if we get anything. And it's a really big challenge that we face. I think we have to be realistic. The numbers are good on Earl's co-sponsors, but moving from that to actually getting a bill moving forward in this climate is incredibly difficult. Earl, I know the last time that you and I talked on the floor about this a week or so back, you mentioned that in addition to the revitalization fund, you were considering other alternatives that we might explore on the Ways and Means Committee to provide some relief, direct or indirect, to some of the restaurants. Has any of that been explored in this call, or do you still have some other options you're looking at in addition to or as an alternative to the revitalization fund?
We are exploring with members of the Independent Restaurant Coalition ways to repackage.
Right.
There are some elements of relief in terms of this demand on the part of some of our colleagues that all of this be offset. We don't do that for disasters, for wildfires. We don't do it for hurricanes. I'd be prepared to make the argument we shouldn't do it here, but we are looking for ways to repackage it, to lower the cost, and to find other sources of money that might be bled into this. And that's we're continuing to consult with our friends with the coalition.
Well, I'm fully committed to work with you on that and to work with our restaurants, and really appreciate the presentation today. I'll pass it on to the next member.
Thank you, Lloyd. We have next Congresswoman Susie Lee from Nevada, who has made it clear about the impact that the pandemic has had on her state, which is one of the most, if not the most, dependent in terms of these venues, restaurants, entertainment, tourism. It's been devastating, and she has been a tireless champion to try and get relief to her state and for national programs. And Susie, I appreciate your efforts and really appreciate your being part of this conversation today.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Earl, for all of your, your leadership on this issue. I mean, no one's been fighting more for restaurants than Congressman Blumenauer. So thank you for all that you do. I'm not going to believe at the point because everyone has made the point of just how unjust it is that we, put together packages to fund, all sorts of things across this country. And 61% of our restaurants are sitting there when, without receiving funding after the Restaurant Revitalization Fund dried up. And so to me, this is about our communities. It's about employees, but most importantly, it's about supporting entrepreneurs who really represent the best of America. And you're putting your personal fortunes on the line when you open up a restaurant. And I know through all of my contact with my local restaurant owners that really this isn't about them, it's about their employees. And so I'm going to join, Earl and Lloyd and Rosa, and we're going to continue to fight. And I know there were some good ideas on how we're going to move this legislation forward. And in Nevada, as Congressman Blumenauer said, I mean, we were looking literally at a cliff as a result of the pandemic. And I will tell you that restaurateurs were the first people and organized to get on the phone with me. And so, and by the way, to imagine all of the things that you've been through, from closing down to then opening up at 50% and then 75% and then going to online ordering and then going back to 50%. I mean, it's just, and in the fight with all of you. And but I agree.
Thank you, Susie.
To continue to focus on getting this through and get this funding through.
Thank
I'm
you.
I'll yield back to you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Susie, and thanks to my colleagues for their partnership and their advocacy. And I would say for each of our speakers, you have laid out the issues eloquently. You are absolutely correct. We're committed to helping in any way we can. We are looking at every avenue, any legislation that goes through, trying to see if it can be attached, trying to build the base of support beyond what we've got, moving potentially through the Senate if we get those 10 votes, or if it's part of a broader COVID recovery. We're there. Finally, I would just say that this has inspired, I think, a lot of attention to the challenges that our independent restaurants face. The challenges, not just COVID, but supply chain fragility that we've seen, escalating costs, the challenges you have with workforce. I, for one, am totally committed to working with you to make that case broadly to Congress. We need to have people understand the challenges you face and committed to long-term solutions. Now, we've been joined by some members of the media, I think, and we offered to allow them to ask questions to any of our panelists. Hillary Barber and my staff has access to who's there. Hillary, are there any friends from the media who have questions for us?
Thanks, Earl, and thank you all. At this time, if you're with the press and you have a question, please go ahead. If you're able to turn on your camera, that'll help our speakers see you. And feel free to unmute yourself, ask your question, identify who you're with, and maybe where you're from. Thank you.
Do you have a list, Hillary, of people that we should call on?
I do. We have, I don't have names, but I do have outlets.
Okay.
So I can run through those names. There's 4 of them that I know of. Anyone from WFSB? Okay. And how about KGW in Portland? Or COIN in Portland? And last but not least, KPTV in Portland.
We've worn them out.
There may be no questions, and if there's anyone I missed, please let us know.
Yeah. Well.
Hi, I'm Zoe. I'm with Brewbound. We are a trade publication specifically focused on the craft beer industry. I was just curious, because we've heard a lot from different breweries that we've talked to, that one of the main issues with the previous round of funding was just being able to access it in the first place. And as Alex mentioned earlier, that kind of, or excuse me, as Jim mentioned earlier, the winners and losers portion of the funding. So is there any efforts or specific changes to your guys' efforts this round to counteract that and try to make it more accessible to more restaurants?
Well, the legislation was crafted to specifically deal with brew pubs, with wine tasting operations. It's a challenge that just is one of numbers, getting more money into this fund. One of the things that we're looking at is seeing if there are other areas to offset. The IDL loans, there may be opportunities for loan forgiveness for some of these institutions. Some of them had paycheck protection loans. Some of those may actually cost more to try and collect. So looking at loan forgiveness for them is one of the areas that we've been exploring, but and perhaps narrowing the cost of the program by limiting it, that it allowed originally allowed up to 20 locations, that perhaps cutting this down so that it deals with 2 or 3 or 4 at most. So there are ways that we're looking at to restrict the cost and to be able to look for other cost relief for these businesses.
Great, thank you.
You bet. Okay, well, why don't we just wrap this up? This information was helpful. We will be sharing it with others when we go back to Washington next week, and we'll continue working with the Independent Restaurant Coalition and individuals for areas that may provide some other relief. As I mentioned, forgiveness on some of these other programs, and being able to recast the parameters of the program so that we could reduce some of the opposition by making it a little more affordable. But we've got legislation that would do it all. Rosa, you were going to say something?
I was just going to say something. I think there's such power in we have 4 stories here today, and the power of those stories are they're palpable, and there are thousands of those stories. I want to suggest, Earl, that that what we do, and maybe we can do this in a special order on the floor, with getting pictures of yourselves,
Sure.
your restaurants, and just go up and just with the picture,
Right.
and members can come from their own district and
Yep.
tell your story. And what is it? What are you going to do? You get some people who say, well, they're going to squander the money. What are they going to, and we need to know, what is it that you're going to do with this money? You're going to employ people. You're going to, it's those powerful words that,
Right.
well, what if you get this? So that we need to have members understand, see a face, a story, and how potent that is to try to move the ball forward. There's 230 in the House, but I will tell you, we got to get to the Senate. I will say that again. I'm glad to hear, Earl, that there's some folks in the Senate, and maybe if this legislation starts in the Senate, we have another opportunity to get it passed in the House. But if we can't pass it in the Senate, I'm going to be very honest with you. It is not going to happen. Members will not vote for something that they say is going to be, it fails and cannot get done. But let's collect the stories. I'm sure there is a story core, and we can get those things out on the floor of the House and do that with names, organizations, and faces.
Yep.
So,
We've had pretty good success dealing with the industry and people who've been sharing these. I think
Right.
it's a great idea to take it to the floor of the House and
Right.
continue it forward. I'll look forward to working with you and our friends when
Happy
we get
to do
back
it.
to Washington. Great.
happy to do it.
Well, again, thank you all. We're going to continue working with you in any avenue we've got, and continue the brainstorming, the inspiration, and being able to work hard to get the stories out and get it across the finish line. And you helped us today by sharing your stories. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you all very much. And, hang in there. I know that's it doesn't make sense for me to say that you have been hanging in there, but please God, just we want to be there. We want to stand side by side with you and try to get this done, and understanding that we'll do everything we can to be able to get it done. We promise. Okay. We don't make a lot of promises, but we'll do whatever we can. We cannot guarantee an outcome, but by God, we're going to be there, you know, every step of the way. So like you have been for all of us. Thank you. Thanks, Earl. Thank you for doing this, Earl.
Thank you. Thank you all. Have a good
Thank you.
afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We
Bye,
appreciate it.
everybody.
Bye-bye.